It is quite an honor to say that I have with me the man who is the former national Greco-Roman wrestling champion. He aspired to the heights of becoming a member of the United States Olympic wrestling team. Yes, and of course that's the man we all know as Bob Roop.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I'm your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride. And a very special episode here this week because we're going to talk all about Bob's first tour of Japan, the JWA, back in 1970, along with the likes of Big Cat, Ernie Ladd, Nick Bockwinkel, Soul Man, Rocky Johnson, so many more. Bob's going to talk about stepping in the ring with the likes of Antonio Inoki, the Giant Baba, some of the aforementioned names, as well as lots of things that went on outside the ring, I am sure. And at the end of that tour, with a few days to spare, Bob Roop and Lars Anderson even traveled down to South Korea to wrestle there. And you want to talk about night and day when it comes to fans. The very subdued, respectful Japanese fans, not in South Korea. All of that and so much more here this week as we jump back in time once more to the life and times of Mr. Bob Roop. But first, guys, just a friendly reminder that you can listen to the Wrestling Stoop along with sister shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF Project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. So whether it's Georgia 1981 with Jamie Ward, the UWF in 1986 with Roman Gomez, or now Memphis 1985 with the likes of Gene Jackson and Steve Crawford, you can certainly get your territory fixed with regional wrestling. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And hey, guys, while you're at it, why don't you do us a favor? Follow us on social media. You guys can start off by friending Bob. You can find him there at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. Send your friend request today. I'm sure Bob looking forward to chatting with each and every one of you. You guys can also follow me, Ray Russell. You can follow me on X, formerly Twitter. You can find me there at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And hey, while you're at it, why not subscribe to my YouTube, guys? It's absolutely free. YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time if you guys would consider becoming a WrestleCopia patron. Talking about that $5 all access tier over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Multiple gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed book-like show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Monday Warfare, and the Regional Wrestling Podcast. You also get early access to many of the podcasts here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners, plus remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA Project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before, but that's still not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, random bonus video drops, and of course, our Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And you get all of that for the low, low price of just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime, show your support. Give it a try for a month. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. So please, if you can, you got a few bucks to spare, looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help us pay some of the bills to keep all of the wonderful shows here at the network up and running for the months and the years to come. And all right, here we go. Can't wait to pick his brain this week, talk all about his very first ever tour of Japan. So without further ado, let's welcome him back, the host with the most. Can't wait for the stories here this week. Welcome back, Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, great to speak with you once again.
Thanks, Ray. It's good to be back with you, my friend.
Always good to hear from you, Bob.
Well, I like the path we've been traveling down this far. Let's go a bit further. Sometimes we go 20 feet. Sometimes we go a couple of miles.
This time we're going to go halfway across the globe. This is where we're headed this week.
Well, that sounds good.
Yeah, so
that was my goal of getting in wrestling, was to travel, and it started pretty early on, and I assume that's where we're going.
It is indeed. 14 months into the business, and you're already traveling to Japan for a tour of the JWA. Amazing. We've already covered, I guess we did as good a job as we could as covering your early years, 69 and the first half of 1970. Not a lot of feuds and things going on. You're still kind of honing your craft there, figuring things out. Lots of tag team wrestling, lots of singles matches as well. And here you are, heading to Japan in September of 1970. I got to ask you, do you recall who booked this for you? Was it Eddie Graham? Was it Hiro Matsuda? How did this come about so quickly into your wrestling tenure that you're headed off to Japan?
I'm not sure if it was Matsuda or Duke Keomuka. It might have been a combination of the two. I know that Duke went with me to Japan, and I'm not saying that's the reason he went. He might have been going over there to talk business with the wrestling company, but he was there for the whole time I was there, which was about, I think he was, yeah. I was there. It was a 40-day tour, that first one. It was 7 weeks, and he was there because we flew back together also.
Probably used it as a business expense, wrote it off there on his taxes to take a trip to Japan.
No, he was. It sounds good. That's what we were talking about, guys doing and coming down to Florida in the winter. But I don't know. Duke had a family in Florida, and he wasn't raised in Japan. Duke was raised in Hawaii.
Right.
In fact, that Keomuka, that is a Japanese name, but the Japanese or the Hawaiian. A lot of the kings their last names started with a K. He did speak Japanese, and he was full-blooded Japanese, but I believe he was born and raised in Hawaii.
Yeah. Well, his last real name was Tanaka because he actually had a son who became a wrestler, Pat Tanaka, who worked in the WWF and whatnot. So, yeah. Okay, so you somehow, or some way, you got booked on this tour of Japan. You're headed off to the JWA, and for those going, wait a minute, I remember New Japan, and I remember All Japan, but what's the JWA? Well, the JWA was created back in the early 1950s by the grandfather, the godfather of Japanese professional wrestling, Riki Dozan, who unfortunately was murdered about 10 years after that in 1963. But the JWA ran strong here for about 20 years, and somewhere around 1972, his top two stars, his Hulk Hogan and Macho Man, his Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, if you will, they decided to run their own promotion. So those two names being Antonio Inoki and the Giant Baba. And Inoki leaves first and goes and forms New Japan in early 1972. And then by the end of 72, Baba leaves and creates the All Japan promotion. And then not too many months later, I think it was like somewhere around April 73, sadly, the JWA folds. But you're here for one of the last tours in 1970 as part of the first ever NWA Tag Team League here. They love to do those tournaments, those round-robin tournaments over in Japan. And it all started with the JWA here. So you're part of that tour, part of that tag league, actually. You're going to be teaming up. Your partner in this one is going to be Lars Anderson, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But how cool was it, I guess looking back in hindsight, that you're on one of the final tours where someone was able to say, I wrestled both Inoki and the Giant Baba. Now, at the time, it probably didn't mean a whole lot other than you're working the top stars of Japan. However, you look back, not a lot of people could say they did that.
Well, that's true, but there was some other factors that were even more predominant in the way I felt about things. Was that, again, being pretty green, I had never worked heel before, so here I'm going to, the America, all the foreign wrestlers and non-Japanese wrestlers, the ones that weren't living and working out of the Japanese company, most of those worked as heels, and all the Japanese wrestlers were baby faces. So that was new, and I wasn't extremely nervous about it, but that was new. The other thing that was new was that I talked earlier about the having a sense of seniority and lack of it in terms of my own career. And, being there in Florida and anywhere in promotion, I'll go aside just for a second here. In December of 1969, like only a few months after I got started, they flew me up to Atlanta I went up there for a specific reason. They were not only getting bad press, they were getting no press. They were getting absolutely no coverage at all from the newspaper to try to help them promote. They sent me up there based on my Olympic background. They set me up with a reporter from the major newspaper, Atlanta Constitutional, I think, and we went and watched a match. I was booked on, say, a Friday night. On Thursday night, we went together to a match, me and the reporter. We sat at ringside, and I had been fed this psychology, all this stuff from Eddie Graham. Not that I believed it. I mean, I'd already been trained and working. I knew it wasn't a shoot, but how to talk about it like it was. So the first 2 or 3 matches we watched, it was okay. It was possible to do that. I could offer, having some verbal skills, I was able to offer rationales for why a guy would do a certain thing. But I don't know, one of the matches, 4th or 5th match, I don't remember which one, and I can't remember whether it was Skull Murphy or Brute Bernard, one of the two. They were a tag team, but one of them was in a match, and it doesn't matter against who. But what he did was he took his opponent outside the ring, and he ran his head into the ring post, a steel ring post.
Right.
And it's not like he did it just one time. He did it about 6 or 7 times, and the guy never bled, and the guy never had any bumps on his head. And the reporter and I are sitting about 10 feet away watching this. And he's looking at me. I've been telling him for like an hour up to this point about, this is what you're seeing is genuine and all this. He's looking at me like, what can you say? I mean, it's just what you say. And why those guys, I'm now looking at it from an experience point of view. I don't know why the booker let them get away with doing that, because you're exposing the business when you did that. Anyway, the paper comes out the next morning, and the gist of the program, the paper says, local wrestling promoters sink to new low. They dupe Olympic wrestler Bob Roop into thinking that wrestling's real.
Oh, wow.
And
wow.
So here I was so embarrassed. I was just mortified.
Talk about you couldn't have it backfire more than that. Not only do they realize that this is a work, but they think that you believe that it's real. Unbelievable.
Yes.
Amazing. Yes. So at least you sold them hard. Like, they believe you. Yeah. You thought it was real.
Well, it's perfect. Roop the dupe. So I have to go to the matches the next night, and I'm walking under. I knew Leo Garibaldi. I'm not sure if he was a booker, but I think he might have been. But he was at least running the show. I knew him. He'd been down to Florida. I didn't know anybody in there, and so I'm going to the dressing room. These major league guys. I'm still a rookie. I've only been in business less than 6 months.
You did. It was just a one-off, right? You were just there for that one matchup with Aldo Bogni, I think, at the the Atlanta City Auditorium, the precursor to the Omni.
Right. That was the reason for me to go up there. That was an excuse for me to do the thing the night before. So anyway, I walk in there. I'm embarrassed. I'm quiet. I'm not doing trying to hide behind, hide behind things. And finally, Leo and Buddy Fuller got me together at the same time. And Leo said, "What's the matter, Bob? What's the problem?" I said, "Did you see that article in the newspaper?" He said, "Yeah, we saw it." I said, "Well, wasn't that about the most horrible thing you could have ever seen?" And Buddy Fuller said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "We haven't had any articles in the paper in 3 or 4 years here." He said, in wrestling, any kind of publicity is good publicity. So they thought it was great. But I'm the one that had to go, when that reporter looked at me after the 10 times banging the guy's head on a steel pole, it doesn't even have a knot in his head.
Right.
What do you say? I couldn't even look the guy in the eye. Anyway, back to going to Japan.
Right.
I still have a little bit of that same attitude, but again, once you're out of your own territory, and where it was meeting at the airport in Los Angeles, meeting the guys I was going on tour with. I remember Ernie Ladd first because he's so noticeable, but most of the other guys were there too. We were in the lounge or in the waiting area waiting to board the airplane. And when I walked in there, I mean, none of the guys were from Florida, so as far as they knew, they knew I wasn't somebody they knew a lot about. I'm sure they'd heard my name because wrestlers like to talk, and I was supposedly the shooter. And you don't get that many Olympians in the business either. So, but as far as they had no idea about my level of expertise. In other words, I went from being in a society where I had a certain amount of in the pecking order. I was at a certain level. I went into a group where really there was no level. And it worked out that way because everybody on the tour worked with Baba and Inoki and all the top guys.
Right.
We all worked with them. There was no real pecking order, and not that anybody. When there was, it wasn't that the guys treated you differently. It's just the main event guys usually didn't have time for you because you're a preliminary guy. Now, if you were working with them, yeah, but I mean, in the dressing room, the more experienced guys would hang out among themselves, and the less guys, the guys who weren't so experienced and were lower on the card, or guys who maybe just booked for one show, they weren't trying to get in on the gossip and the conversation with the main guys. They wouldn't want to be around Dusty's group or whatever. So being in that group and being kind of having a new clean bill of health, where I was rated as like being equal to everybody else, that was very refreshing. And flying on, it started right away. Guys were ribbing and trying to be humorous and tell stories and everything. It looked like it was going to be a good tour, and it was. It turned out to be a very good one.
Well, let's before we get into anything, I just want to go over some of the foreign names that go overseas with you to Japan, the Gaijin, if you will. Ernie Ladd, Rocky Johnson, Nick Bockwinkel, Big John Quinn, one of the Canadians there. Lars Anderson, who just the stories you heard about Lars kind of got you into the business. So that was kind of, and he was your tag team partner on this tour. Also, Cowboy Frankie Lane from Canada, and a fellow by the name of Bud Rattal, who's not very well known. He worked about 20 years up in the Vancouver area. I do believe he was actually from California, I think, but spent most of his entire life working up there in Canada. And this is really the tail end of his career because he has to retire maybe within the next year or so, I would think. But he's working this with you guys. So there's 8 of you. And right away you say, maybe you hit it off with some guys, but maybe not so much others, or did everybody seem to get along?
Yeah, everybody got along. I got along. I hit it off with Nick Bockwinkel very well. We were both veterans, for one thing. I don't think anybody else in the group. Quinn and Rattal and Frankie Lane were all Canadians.
Yes.
So they wouldn't have served in the U.S. military. But of the 5 Americans, Nick Bockwinkel and I were the only ones that had done military service. So, that created a bond. You do time in the military.
Sure.
You share, you have things that you shared in your past life.
Right.
The Army's the same, no matter where you're stationed in the world. The Army's the same. That was nice. But everybody, the guys try to get along. We were around each other all the time, Right. And so now Quinn was quiet. I don't remember ever even talking to him one-on-one. Rattal was the same way. Rocky Johnson was good to be around. Ernie Ladd was great. Nick was great. Lars was great. Yeah, so we had a good time. We had a good group. Bud Rattal specifically got off to a bad start. The plane to Japan, we stopped and always everyone I went on stopped in Hawaii to refuel or whatever. It wasn't that long a flight, but stopped in Hawaii and for an hour or so. And a lot of the guys would get duty-free booze there. Some of them were foolish enough to drink it on a plane. When we got to Tokyo, and I believe it was Narita Airport, we all got off, and that was a nice thing. We didn't have to go through customs. We got off the plane by ourselves with a small group. It didn't take long to get everybody off there. So we had a group, and there was no Bud Rattal. We're down on the runway, waiting to get on a little shuttle to go off. They had collected our passports. They were going to go in, and the company was going to clear customs for us. And they had an arrangement. They've been doing this for years by this time, so they had an arrangement with customs there, and it was no problem. So, but no Bud Rattal, and so one of the gophers for the promotion got on a plane to look for him, and came back and said, "Well, there's a guy in there asleep," but he said he's not this guy. He showed the picture. I looked, and it was a picture of Bud Rattal, but it was about 20 years old. It had been taken about 20 years earlier. It showed a young Bud Rattal.
Right. The
guy the passed out Bud Rattal sitting back there in the back of the plane was drooling out of the side of his mouth. So I got on a plane with the guy, with the young Japanese guy, and went back there and said, "Yeah, that's him." And I shook Bud and said, "Hey, we're here, buddy. Come on, let's go." And he was okay. He wasn't passed out. He was just a heavy sleeper. I mean, you'd land, and everybody's getting off. You'd think you'd wake up, but
you'd think.
Anyway, he got off to sort of a inauspicious start. And that's the most I remember about Bud. Yeah, it was a heady time for me. Again, the guys, we all treat each other. No, there was no like rank. There was nobody because one night, you might be going against the top Japanese guys, and the next night you might be going against like what we would consider the more preliminary guys. And so,
Right.
But you rotated, and so nobody was saying, yeah, well, I'm and plus everybody was getting paid what they had been contracted to pay. You weren't getting a percentage of the house. You were guaranteed, you had a set fee that you signed up to be paid, and that's what you were going to get. So there wasn't any jostling around or any jealousy about who was, the main event guys. For example, if the promotion had been where the guys who used as main events got paid more than the guys that were underneath, there would have been some hostility, because there would be the typical griping, bitching, whatever you want to call it. The guys would say, "Oh, I should be in the main event instead of, that guy." But we didn't know. We didn't have any of that over there. So it was nice. It was really pleasant, especially for someone like me, who was still green, not just in experience in wrestling itself,
Right.
but in show business. I mean, amateur wrestling is as far from show business as you can get. There's nothing showy about it. Amateur wrestling doesn't draw big crowds of people to see it, except in places where it's really, really like in the United States, Oklahoma, Iowa, and Pennsylvania now, but not everywhere in the country. Like, say, football or basketball, where there's a big sport in just about every college. Wrestling is not the same at all. But then again, pro wrestling isn't big everywhere in the country either. Yeah, it was nice to be over there and to be one of the boys, given the same consideration or rank. If I was a private, we were all privates. If I was a general, we were all generals. And I like that part of it, yeah, a lot. And I talked about liking Nick Bockwinkel, and that was another reason. Nick had been in the business, I think, 15 years by that time. And he treated me just like a peer. Because we didn't talk about wrestling. We talked about history and service and philosophy and all different kinds of things. Because you had a lot of time, I remember one trip, we got up out of the hotel, we got on a tour bus, we went to an airport, we flew, landed on an island, off island, got on a boat, went across a lake on that island. We got off the plane on a bus to go down to a dock, got on a boat, a big pontoon boat, went across this big lake to the other side of the island, and got on a tour bus there, and they took us to our arena. So we were on a tour bus, a plane, a tour bus, a boat, and another tour bus. So,
My God, thank God they had somebody leading you guys along the way. You guys would have never figured that out on your own.
Oh yeah, I'm surprised they didn't put leashes on us like a team of Huskies, keep us all together. Now, sometimes you could add a train to that. It'd be bus, train, plane, boat. I don't think we ever had all four the same day, but you would get that from time to time. So, you had a lot of time to, now it was in between, but you had a lot of time just sitting there traveling. Like, if you traveled all day, what are you going to do? Now, I took books. I always had 2 or 3 books with me, and you could buy books over there in English, but I always took 2 or 3 books, and so I had them if I wanted to read, or if I wanted. That's a way to have privacy if you need it. You can be in the middle of a busy airport and get involved in a book if you can find kind of a quiet corner where nobody's tripping over you, and you can kind of get away from wherever your environment and go to wherever the book will take you. But I didn't need that much in Japan. Nick was a great conversationalist, and he had a great sense of humor, so we had a good time.
So you said Bud Rattal, he didn't do a whole lot on this tour as far as cause any trouble. Big John Quinn was kind of quiet, but you hit it off with Nick Bockwinkel. Of course, you already knew Lars Anderson from years prior. So it seems like everything's working out okay. Everybody's on the same level. Like you said, everybody's, you're all main eventers, you're all curtain jerker, whatever you want to call it. You guys are all the same. So that works out. And it's kind of funny. Like you said, Nick Bockwinkel had been in the business for quite a while. Ernie Ladd was Ernie Ladd. And here you are, Bob Roop, 14 months in the business, and you're on the same level as them. So, yeah, that had to feel pretty damn good. But you talked about playing heel over there. Now, that's a different kind of heel in Japan than it is in the States. No, I would imagine.
Yeah, the Japanese fans, we'll get into this later too. The Japanese fans are unique in that you can do almost anything without getting them to get out of their seat. You can set your guy on fire in the middle of the ring, and they won't, their way of showing disapproval is they won't applaud for you when the match is over. I mean, you would get fans that would give you it wouldn't be wholehearted, but after maybe you won your match by hitting a guy with brass knucks or something, there'd be still few people maybe even clap for you, just out of custom. It wasn't out of any desire to do so.
Right.
It was just out of custom. If they're really mad at you, nobody'd clap for you. But they wouldn't get out of their seats. Nobody threw anything. They weren't that kind of people. That was nice. Later on, we'll get to go on from there to Korea, where it's exactly the opposite.
Okay, but, that's interesting.
The first night, I went on first. Shall we go there, the first match?
Yeah, we are. And if maybe you'll answer this for me when I ask you this question, maybe you can work this into your first match here, because it kind of works into that anyway.
Okay.
You're used to working in the United States. You've certainly worked. You worked Amarillo. No, you haven't been to Amarillo yet at this point, but you've worked Florida here for over a year straight. So you're used to the Florida crowd. Sometimes they can get a little wild and whatnot. And here you go to Japan. Did anybody give you the 411 before you went out there for that first match? That the crowd, they kind of sit on their hands, so to speak, and where they don't really make noise. Were you expecting that walking out there? Or if not, how did you treat that? Did you think to yourself, man, I can't get over out here? I just wonder how that was the first time. Even if you knew it, I have to imagine it plays some kind of crazy psyche stuff going on in your mind or whatever. Even though you know that they're not supposed to be making noise, it's got to throw you off some way.
Think about it. This is funny when I think about it. Remember when we talked about me being in Germany, where I jumped up the top rope and did a shoulder breaker and all that, and everybody laughed?
Right.
And I was so pissed off because they laughed at my best moves, and I thought was going to awe them. They were going to be just thinking, ready to kill me, and they all laughed.
Right.
So here we got the exact opposite. Instead of laughing, even laughing reaction, there's no reaction at all. Yeah, you talk about being pissed off for different reasons. But no, nobody informed me about that. But there was another factor. Even if they weren't yelling, screaming, clapping, or whatever, there was that emotional, nervous energy in the place. You could feel it, that electricity in the building. And they don't go crazy about sumo wrestling either, but believe me, there are people paid $200 for three of them to sit on one typical seat. That they're just avid with anticipation, and they wait an hour and they get a 3 or 4 second match in the sumo, and they go crazy about it. But again, the same thing. Nobody jumping up and down screaming. No, I didn't have that, but you still felt. Let's put it this way: they were watching. They weren't going out and getting sake or rice or whatever. They were watching. So I never really picked up on one time, I'll tell you about that one down the line a little bit. After Lars and I just about butchered one of their guys, and we didn't get any reaction at TV. That night we did in the live show. But with my first match, I went against a guy named Okuma.
Yes.
And we went out there, and again, I'd been told that. Not by the promotion or anybody. I just was told by American wrestlers, well, yeah, you're the heel over there. So Okuma and I tie up. He's got a buzz cut. I've got longish hair. And we tie up in the top wrist lock. I'm getting ready to pull his tights or something to foul him to show I'm a heel. And he reaches up and he grabs my hair. I've got this long hair. He pulls my hair, and because I'd been a babyface for so long, I reacted before I even thought about it, and I took a bump, like he pulled my hair. About halfway down to the ground, I said, all of a sudden, wait a minute, you're supposed to be the heel, Roop. I bounced, I don't know if all of me even hit the ground, because my shoulders, I think I bounced back up, and I tore into him. I whacked, and I didn't hit him in the mouth or in the nose with a fist, but I started clubbing him. He started clubbing back. Well, first of all, to start the match, we tied up. I pushed him in the ropes. He dug in, pushed me all the way back. We were about the same size, and he was a strong kid, or man. And we pushed each other around the ring, and finally got in the center and tied up. And then he pulled my hair. Well, we whacked each other, I don't know, probably a couple hundred times each. But, we were both. We had red splotches all over us from being smacked or kicked or whatever. As a referee, I can't remember. I think I beat him. I can't remember how. But he came over to raise my hand. He said, I thought you were supposed to be a wrestler.
Olympian.
I didn't get anything even resembling a hold.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
well, you had to get over as that heel character, I guess, right? And you established that right out of the gate, the night one of the tour.
Well, you know what? On the way out to the ring, I had to go through the Japanese dressing room because it just was between the visiting or heel dressing room and the ring. And I went through, and I'm the first guy, and I'm not Nick Bockwinkel or Ernie Ladd or somebody they would know or recognize. Or guys who'd been there. All those guys probably been there before. So, they know them. So, as I'm walking through, I'm watching, I don't have my head down. I'm not hiding anything. I'm looking to see if anybody wants to say hi or whatever. And I hadn't met any of them yet. And the guys would look at me and then just look away, Maybe nobody nodded or did anything. No, it was just like, it wasn't any big deal. It wasn't like I was invisible, but it wasn't like I was certainly of no moment going to the ring. Now on the way back, when I went through that dressing room on the way back, all of them were looking at me, and about 3/4 of them were giving me a little short bow, a little nod, like, because they knew that somewhere down the line pretty quick, they were going to be working with me.
Bob Roop's son.
All of a sudden, they think, maybe I better try to be a little more polite to this meat chopper here. I don't want to go out there and have to fight for my life by whacking a guy 50 times. So, I thought it was funny, too, but on the way back, not one of them ignored me on the way back. They were paying big attention big time. And I get back to my own dressing room, and I can't remember who was going out second, Frankie Lane or somebody says, how am I supposed to follow that? Way to go. Way to start the show. You chop meat for 10 minutes. He said,
yeah.
And Ernie Ladd and everybody had something to say, like, what the guy do? Do you attack your mother? I mean, why did you be, everybody, they were like, and they were ribbing me. I was kind of embarrassed because I didn't get not one hold. So yeah, it was an inauspicious start, but it turned out okay.
You won the match, so it doesn't get any better. You beat the guy from corner to corner, and you scored the win. So a very established Bob Roop after one match here on his first tour of Japan.
Well, going back to your question of a few minutes ago, I think it was probably pretty quiet. I don't know, maybe I got a hand on the way back because, at least we gave him a lot of action. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
I mean, we looked like two windmills in there, on high gear. But, I was embarrassed. I thought, my God, how could it have been any more horrible? But they had seen everything over there. And there's guys, that's all they do. We were talking about Demoler, for example, on a past episode.
Yeah.
And, he wasn't grabbing a lot of holds. If he was over there, he was whacking people. So, that way, and again, I don't care what a guy's background is, a guy that comes in as a judo champion or whatever, or karate, he's not using, if he uses karate, it gets disqualified, so no matter what the background is, you're supposed to be using wrestling type stuff. But yeah, it was, I think it's funny because the reaction from the other wrestlers, it got funnier as time went on. We receded further and further into the past. I would think back on it and think about the attitude of those guys watching and thinking what they must have been perceiving or looking forward to, saying, this is a 7-week tour. I'm going to be booked against this guy, this meat chopper out there at least 3 or 4 times. Maybe I better get to know him a little bit or something, or at least I can talk to him in the ring. Or
sounds like you got a bigger ovation backstage than you did from the fans.
Well, I got over better.
Yes.
I just get over with the other wrestlers, and the guy, Yeah, and I got that the rest of the tour.
I'm assuming you probably crossed paths with Okuma again, because I think he worked Florida and Amarillo around the same time as you did.
Yeah, I worked with him out in Amarillo, and maybe Florida too. I don't recall. If the matches were good, like I say, I don't remember.
Probably not so much like that match though. Here in Japan, I would guess.
Yeah, and another thing is like the guys on the tour, John Quinn. I'd never knew anything about him before. I'd never even heard of him before the tour, or Frankie Lane, and I was doing some research earlier this week, and Quinn was a heavy hitter. He worked against Bruno Sammartino and beat him.
Yeah, Quinn was a big deal once upon a time. Yeah.
So again, I'd never heard of him, and I didn't read wrestling magazines. I never did in my career because it's for what purpose? They're not. It's not like even an amateur
fiction.
Yeah, they're fiction, and but they're animated comic books, but not animated, but graphic comic books, but that was like Chris Markoff getting hit in the face with a brick, and it goes in the wrestling magazine. He had this attack. He fought 5 wrestlers in the Battle Royal all by himself or something, whatever the gimmick was. I said, why are you going to read a wrestling magazine if everything in there is all promos? It's all created to sell magazines. And so you can't believe, there's very little in there that's based on fact. And see, that started from the get-go with programs, the Florida Championship Wrestling programs. Jerry Prater was the guy that did all that, a guy named Jerry Prater, who was excellent. He was a very talented guy. He made these great programs and everything, but a lot of the stuff in there was all created. It just made up.
Right.
They would create angles of something that supposedly happened behind the scene that didn't happen at all. So there was no reason to, and it was fiction, but there wasn't my type of fiction. I saw no purpose in reading the stuff. I mean, I didn't despise it or look down on it. I just saw no purpose to it. So I didn't know all the guys. I didn't even know Nick Bockwinkel's background. And now Nick hadn't done his AWA stuff yet. He was another 10 years from when he became a real legend with his AWA thing up there. He was up there 10 or 12, 15 years as champion.
It was pretty much the 1970s where Nick really took off in the AWA, the tag team with Ray Stevens early on, and then, of course, all of his runs as the world champion there as well. So, but I get what you're saying here in 1970. So Bockwinkel had been around. His father had been a wrestler.
Right.
But Nick had been around quite a while by this point. So he was established as a wrestler, but he really hadn't hit that real stride in his career where he just became the top champion, at least in the AWA. And by my accounts, one of my favorite world champions. I don't care what promotion it was. I love watching Nick Bockwinkel work.
Oh, yeah, he was great. And we would go out, most of the wrestlers, I went to 4 tours. Now, I thought I did something, and I read Psycho Negro went like 20 tours of Japan, 20 tours of Australia. And now his career was about 3 times as long as mine, but he would go every year or so, and mine were spread out over 7, 8, or 10 years. My 4 tours. I didn't try to go very often. I wasn't trying to get booked over there. I don't know why. It didn't seem important. But no, I did nothing against it. But I had other things going wherever I was at. So.
How were you paid? Were you paid by the night? Were you paid in advance, a certain amount of days? How did that work over there for a tour of Japan back in this time frame?
Well, if you needed money, they would offer you a draw. They weren't going to pay you like your full pay because you could get hurt or someone. I don't know. I never heard of a guy leaving, but could happen.
It's happened.
So, So they would pay you if you had, say, you were. I think when I went in 69 or 70, I was getting, I think, $500 a week, which, I liked it. It was fine. The top guys might have been making 3 times that, but I didn't care about that. But you got paid. You got paid when a tour was over.
Okay.
They paid you when a tour was over. That's when you got paid.
Now, were they covering the obviously they were covering the transportation. Were they covering the hotels for you guys?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Hotels, and now your food, getting your food was your own responsibility. Mm-hmm. You could eat the hotel, you could go out and you could go to little shops, and a lot of the restaurants and shops, places that you could eat would have in the window, they would have plastic representations of whatever the food was.
Okay.
So you could, they didn't speak in English there. In these cities was a lot of tourists. You could just ask the waiter to come. You go to the window and show them what you wanted. That made it easy. But once in a while, after a while, you'd learn enough Japanese words to be able to order food. That part, yeah, you had to take care of. They took care of everything else: your transportation, your hotel. They flew you there. They flew you back, and what a way to see the world. They pay you way to wherever you go. They pay you while you're there. They actually carry you around where you get to see. Like I saw 3 or 4 different Japanese islands when I was there, as well as Tokyo and Osaka and all the big major cities. And, there were things in Osaka. They had these medieval castles that were the basis of in fact, it's coming back on the air again next year or this year, a thing called Shogun. It was a book written by a writer named James Clavell. It was about medieval Japan, about a power struggle among samurai warriors for the leadership. The shogun was going to be like the boss, the king or the emperor or whatever. And there was all this infighting going on. And one of the main things in this book was these castles that they made. They're made out of wood, like big trees, beams that would be like 3 feet square, that you would start at the base and build them. They were like 8, 9, 10 stories high. Well, I'm reading this book about these things, and we actually go to Osaka and go on a tour of the same thing I read about the night before. We get to go on one of these castles, and we didn't have elevators. You had to walk up there. And I don't want to sound like I'm a snob or anything, but to me, kind of stuff like that was fascinating. And with wrestlers, our attention span somehow seems somewhat limited.
Right.
15-second look around and they're ready to go on and go somewhere and get a beer. But I enjoyed it, So, you got to do things like that. With Nick was one of the ones that didn't want to stay in a hotel. He would go out just like I would go out by my own on other tours, but because you were safe. There were places you weren't safe, but you could avoid them just by keeping your eyes open.
Stay away from the Yakuza. You'll be all right.
Yeah. We would go to they had these malls that were, these flea market type things that were, like 400 or 500, 600 shops over 3 or 4 stories. You could go and go fishing for eels. And if you caught one, you could have it cooked and eat it right there if you wanted.
So were you big into Japanese cuisine or did you have a hard time trying to find things to eat over there? Because I've heard some Americans tell stories, at least especially back in that time period, that they would, quote unquote, starve while they were in Japan because they refused to eat the local cuisine, if you will. And it was harder to come by to find you a hamburger or even a steak or things like that back then.
Well, I didn't know because, like I say, you could go out and, you could go in a place and you could get the great beef, Kobe beef and all that. And they would cook it, they'd cook it for you. And you could cook it yourself. They give you a little cooker that you could cook and they'd bring you the stuff. You could,
oh, wow.
Like a Mongolian barbecue,
right.
Where you got all this stuff. Well, they would bring it to you and you could cook it yourself and they'd order beer and whatever. And they would go out and bend over backwards to try to give you whatever you wanted. You just had to be, I think a lot of guys might have been nervous about being out in public because we were heels over there. And now it occurred to me, maybe that's why they didn't want to go out. But I knew that people didn't look at us as heels like we were at any risk being out in the public because we were heels and on the TV and all that.
Yeah.
I was out. I never felt it. I never saw it. You could feel it. When people don't like it, you could feel it.
It always felt to me, and I've never been to Japan. I've certainly never worked as a heel wrestler in Japan, but it always felt to me like there was always a sign of respect. Whether you were a heel or a face, they respected you as a fighter, as a gladiator, if you will. They treated wrestling as a real sport over there. So even though you guys were heels, you didn't get the heel heat in Japan that you guys got here where they tried to shank you and things like that.
Right. Yeah, there was that element of respect. And also, they're cultured people. Some of the stuff that happened in World War II was barbaric, but that was kind of because the leadership, Tojo, was barbaric. They're cultured people. And, English is their second language. And I love Japan. I'm looking for some way to try to get my boys over there, my 2 sons. while I'm still around and get over there with them together because it's a great country. It's safe. People are friendly, polite, and you can go anywhere. Nick and I went out to these young ladies that we met that were like escorts, and I don't mean in a professional way. They were just showing us around. They were fans, and they just were showing us around. They took us to a place. In fact, Nick and I sang karaoke back in 1970.
Oh, I wish that was on film.
Yeah. Well, let me see. Yeah, in 70. Yeah, we went to the club. Now the place was in Tokyo, and because we didn't leave there till about 1 o'clock. When we left, the girls went off on their own and arranged to meet us at a coffee shop near our hotel, rather than walk out of there with us, because there might have been some unseemly, like a yakuza or something down there that might not have liked to see, the young Japanese, or not young, but Japanese women with American men. That might have created some heat, is what I'm saying.
Sure, I get that.
So the girls were they were very nice, They weren't going to have us run any risk or anything. So that was the only time we ever had to even worry about it. I went to a movie a couple times with a Japanese, one time with a young Japanese girl, or another time with a young Japanese guy. And, it was never had any. I saw the movie Tora Tora Tora, which was about Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor. And part of the movie, now, I'm the only American or non-Japanese I could see in the theater. And about 3/4 of the way after the attack, they had these Americans grab a couple of Japanese people living there and smacking them around. I started feeling very, very conspicuous.
I would imagine.
Yeah. But that just was an unfortunate coincidence. But even then, there was no problem.
So you seem to be hitting it off great with Nick Bockwinkel. This is the first time you've ever met him, I'm imagining. And you guys hit it off. You guys were both in the service. You guys are both professional wrestlers. Nick, quite a great worker in the ring himself. But there's some other names on this tour that I don't see them meshing well. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean just different ideals of how to have a good time or what to do here. And I see Ernie Ladd and Rocky Johnson on this tour. They actually teamed them up, I'm assuming, as the African-American contingent here. How creative. But it's Ernie Ladd. I have to imagine he was quite the showman, at least in the locker rooms.
Well, yeah, a little bit. Where Ernie was demonstrative was on the trains. We'd be on trains, and he'd be playing cards with 2 or 3 guys, and he would get loud, and sometimes a little bit, his language was a little bit. The guys would think that because you don't hear the Japanese speaking English that they don't know English, but even if they don't, they know what a swear word is. And I mean, they weren't saying F word or anything really vile, but they might GD or something like that, or SOB. And, you got people with kids on the train, all around us. So Nick and I, a lot of times, and I don't want to sound like being a snob, but Nick and I, a lot of times you could find a car on the train that didn't have many people in it. So you had some privacy. And Nick and I would go and we talk. We talk philosophy and just different stuff. And one of the things you talk about Nick being a great talent, one of the things that made him stand out was his interviews, or were his interviews.
Oh, yeah.
And his interviews were based on the guy had an intellect. He didn't have to scream and yell to get his point across. He could get his point across in a very rational manner and come across to being totally credible. And then all he had to do was, in fact, one of those ones where people say, well, the guy's nice looking, he can talk, he's intelligent. Why can't he be a good guy? He's got to insist on being a bad guy, and that would get a ton of hate for him, as opposed to some guy who's, comes out there with somebody's severed head under his arm, determined to be a heel. So, yeah, Nick had a lot of talent, but he was fun, too. I remember a night that we had been out, and it was dark, and we sat down on a bus stop outside a little shop, and there was no traffic, very little traffic. We weren't in Tokyo. We were in some little side city. All of a sudden, we kept seeing this light, and so it was coming from behind us, and it would be just like flare up, and so we watched it for a while, and after like a minute or so, this flame comes shooting out a window, like second story up. About 2 feet of flame comes out this open window. So we went looking to see what that was, and it was a little shop. So we found an entrance to it, and we went up the steps, we went in, and what would happen, the guy was cooking noodles and rice or noodles and making soup and or whatever. I probably had a bunch of things to order, but what he would do is where the flames came was when he would pour the oil, the cooking oil, onto his hot wok. He had a great big wok about 3 feet across. You know, the wok, the bowl,
Sure.
the cooking. Yeah, when it was red hot, or not red hot, but it was really hot. And when he poured the oil in it, it would light up, and it was great advertising because this flame went out the window. The window was right next to the stove, and he would pour it in that direction.
Homemade hibachi, man.
Yeah. So we ordered some soup, and yeah, every time we were in that, it was a suburb of Tokyo, and every time we were there, we went up there several times. But little stuff like that, and going to the flea markets and just hanging around together. And again, there was never any danger. Nick had a great sense of humor. 7 weeks, being on the road for 7 weeks with the wrong people. Oh my God, what a nightmare!
Yeah. Were you guys roomed together? Was it like 2 to a room, 1 to a room? How did that work as far as sleeping arrangements went?
I always had my own room. I'm sure everybody did, unless they requested something else. And they weren't, they weren't big suites. They were a small room with a bed, and you had a bathroom, and it was very small.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you started to say something about Ted DiBiase or something there.
I was going to say Ted DiBiase, and I spent a week on the road with King Kong Bundy, and Bundy wouldn't drive. He couldn't sit in the back seat, and so he had the passenger seat in the front, and he couldn't fit behind the wheel. He said he couldn't, so he wouldn't drive. And we'd pick him up from his hotel. He'd sleep, go back to sleep until he got hungry, and we had to stop so he could eat. And then that was the routine after we were in Pennsylvania for a week. It was gray and dark. It was the winter. It was gray and dark all week, rainy, and after a week, we spent a week every day traveling with me and Ted DiBiase and Bundy. Ted and I taking turns driving. And when we got back after the end of the week to turn the car in, Ted and I said about the same thing at about the same time. He said, if I had to do that every week, he said, I'd quit the business. And I agreed with him because, what a pain in the butt. Rest in peace, Chris. But you were no fun on the road, my friend.
Well, he was having fun. He didn't have to drive. He got to sleep whenever he wanted. He was having a good time. Maybe he worked you guys. How about that?
Very, very possible, But the guys that do that don't endear themselves to you.
No, definitely not.
And if you want people to despise you or think negatively of you, I mean, why would you do that? We're in the same business, If he gets in trouble out there, I'm going to go out there and help him. I mean, I don't care if there's a full-blown riot and there's people with bats and, even guns. If he's out there in trouble, everybody's going to go help him because that's the code. But I think that if your heart's in it, like if it's Nick, I'm going to Nick Bockwinkel, I'm going to save, or King Kong Bundy, I'm going to save. I know who I'm going to be more eager and more actually caring a lot about saving them. Not that I wouldn't care. I wouldn't want anybody, any of my comrades to come to harm or, to be harmed. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, Nick was he was a lot of fun.
So you sang karaoke with Nick.
He ran into, the girls volunteered to the band leader that we had a couple people in the audience that would want to sing. And I said, not me. And so Nick got up there. And he was a good singer. He sang something. He said, now my partner here. And I said, no. He said, yeah. They had a hand mic that you carry around. He just brought it over to me. He said, you don't have to. You just stand up, Bob. I don't know what I sang, Jingle Bells or something horrible. But yeah, I sound like a
in
frog.
September, mind you. Yeah, good stuff. There's a name here on the tour that I haven't really heard you talk about yet, but he kind of indirectly played a big part in you joining the wrestling business, and that's Lars Anderson, who obviously would go on to be part of the early incarnation of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, the Anderson brothers of Gene and Lars, and eventually Ole will join in there as well. But Lars Anderson here, he becomes your tag team partner more often than not on this tour.
Lars, I like Lars, I respect him, but he wasn't real social like Nick was. We didn't hang out. Now, we went to Korea together, but even then, we were together on a plane. But after we got back to the hotel, I don't remember ever eating with him or being in his room or him in my room. So even though we were there for 4 days. So not real social. We had good matches. He was very believable. We did a match one time with a guy that should have had, I mean, anywhere in the world, you'd have a full-blown riot, except Japan, I think. We did a thing where they were trying to get one of their baby faces to get him over stronger against, and they were going to use me and Lars to do it. So they were going to have him bleed. And what they did is Lars had a blade on his finger, and I got the ring bell, and I held up the ring bell. We had the other Japanese wrestler tied in the ropes, I think upside down by his leg. The referee was trying to get him out, and Lars brought the wrestler over, and he had him by the hair with the hand that had the blade on it. So as he got close to, I had the ring bell was on a big block of wood, and I had it leaning against the top turnbuckle in our corner. So Lars took the Japanese wrestler and ran him 4 or 5 feet, and about a foot or two away from the block, he gigged him with that blade, and he gigged the hell out of him. Because when he smashed his head into the block, and the kid bounced back, the blood shot in the air, and we beat the hell out of him. We pounded him. By the time we got back to the dressing room, when the match was over, we went in to thank him. I'm surprised he wasn't getting a transfusion with the new blood, because he unlaced his boots. He had blood all the way down into his boots. Now he was sweating, of course, so it was running. Yeah, he was so great. I'm sure he needs stitches. I don't know how many, but a bunch. And he was so grateful. He was thank you. I mean, he was bending over backwards like special thank you, because that kind of thing would get him over there. And instead of it looking penny ante, he had plus if he had a scar, that made him more notable in his profession, his chosen profession over there. So yeah, it's different value systems for why people do things. But now after that one, here you got a local fellow countryman of all the people in the audience, and you not only got him busted open, you're beating the hell out of him, kicking him in the head and doubling up on him. And I think we ended up getting DQ'd, been pounding on the guy for so long, knocked the referee down or whatever. And we got out of there with nobody. I'm respecting if anybody's going to be any kind of riot or anything, this has got to be it.
Right.
Nothing, except we got no applause. But that night, that was at TV in the afternoon. That night, I think the building held either 16 or 26,000. It was full. And we had some serious heat that night, because there was dead quiet during our match, and there was no applause for anything we did.
Seen the TV, clearly.
Yes, it saw the TV, and it was live, yeah. So we had some serious heat, which was good. I mean, that's what we were there for. Nobody came to us afterwards and said, I don't think a Japanese guy would have gone for it. Well, the referee knew what was going to happen. The referees tuned into whoever was running the show, the booker, so they knew what was going to happen. I mean, in fact, they probably asked for it. We didn't come up with it. That was heady stuff for a guy who's only been in the business, a year or so.
Certainly.
And in fact, there was a wrestler over there called Kintaro Oki.
Kintaro Oki.
Kintaro Oki. I always thought he was Oki Kintaro. Well, that's his Japanese name. He was a Korean wrestler. His name was Il Kim. And in Japan, in Korea, he was like Dusty Rhodes and Hulk Hogan and the Beatles put together. He was a demigod. He was like almost above being human. He was so popular because he was a promoter, and he had his base was Seoul, Korea. And he asked Lars and me if we would want to come over there for a couple of matches at the end of the Japanese tour, and we agreed to do it. So we had it a week. We're actually out of the country like 8 weeks, or 8.5 weeks instead of just 7.5. We went over there, and the way they advertised the match, we rode around town, sitting and it was probably about 40 degrees. We rode around town, sitting in the back of a convertible car. We were sitting in the back seat, like up on the back, like near the trunk, like a victorious general being paraded down Madison Avenue. And the guys in the front would throw out handfuls of leaflets advertising the match. That's the way, and we drove around Seoul for a couple hours doing that. And then Friday night we had a match, and there were 2 singles, and I wrestled this guy Oki's tag team partner, and Lars wrestled Oki. And nothing. I think I came down to the match, his match, and did something, but it was no big deal. Now the fans were different. They made noise in Korea, but nobody got out of their seats as far as I could tell. Because I do remember going down to the ring and running in and doing something. We'll get Lars, I think, got DQ'd or something. Well, the next night, it's a tag team match. Me and Lars against the guy that I had wrestled the night before and this Oki. And we did a thing where we got rid of the partner somehow. And Lars had, Oki was bleeding. The referee's bleeding. We busted him, supposedly we didn't, but, he looked like he got busted open too. And we're taking turns. Oki, he's down on his knees, holding his head back, and the other part of the team would run up and kick him in the head. And then we switch, and so we did that a couple times each. And all of a sudden, the ring started filling up with chairs.
Oh wow!
People started throwing chairs. Now we had been conditioned by what happened in the last 7 weeks in Japan to think that there was going to be the same in Korea. I mean, well, we got all Orientals here, right? I mean,
right, sure, it's all the same, right? Sure.
Yeah, it's all the same, but no, it's not all the same. Oh my God, Lars, as soon as his chair starts, Lars says, "Let's go." So we have to, well, he got more experience than me, and believe me, I agreed with him. Yeah, let's go. Well, he left the ring, and when we got to the aisle where we were to enter, like say the 6 or 7 feet from around the ring, we got to where our aisle started. It wasn't quite completely open, so he stopped and raised up like he was gonna yell and scream or whatever and scare people, and I was right behind him. Whack! I feel something hit me in the back, and I turn around, and this guy, old man, he's got to be 100 years old, and he's struggling like heck to lift up this chair that he just whacked me with. And thank God he's 100 years old, because if he got close enough, it had been a young guy who could have smacked me in the head and busted knocked my brains loose. And so he's trying to raise the chair to whack me again. He's having a hard time because he's so old and feeble. So I turned around and put my hand between Lars' shoulder blades and said, "Let's go." And I pushed him down the aisle and just rammed the aisle open. Well, by the time we got halfway back, there was a balcony. So on both sides at the top, there's people in those seats at the right above the aisle can see us. We're going to be passing right beneath of them. There's at least 50 of them there. And the other thing this Il Kim did, he sold beer. He sold beer, and how he sold it? He sold it in 2-liter quarts. Woo. Big quart bottles of beer, a glass.
I wish I had wrestled in South Korea.
Oh man, you could take a bottle and fracture somebody's skull in a second.
Oh yeah.
So these people are waiting. They're waving the bottles, and they're waving. Come on, we're waiting. They're waiting for us to go through that tunnel. We're going to be right underneath them when they can throw these bottles. So we're not going to walk through there. We're going to, never run. No, forget about that. Let's not only run, let's levitate and get through there. So
you should have told Sam Steamboat when he told you never run. Well, you never worked South Korea then, did you, Sam?
In some cases, you better run. Yeah. So Lars stopped to do the T-Rex thing again, and a bottle whizzed by his head, and I don't know if it brushed his hair or not, but all of a sudden he was gone, and I was right behind him. We hit that open space going about 60, and we got through there. Bottles crashed behind us. When we left, about 5 hours later, when we left, there was still glass out there, covering the entire floor out there where the bottles all smashed. We ran back there. Now, before the match, in our dressing room, there was 25, 30 people in there. There was all kinds of bigwigs, celebrities, singers, actors, officials, politicians. the ring girls, beautiful girls that hand you when you go in the ring, they give you flowers and all that. Everybody was back there wanting to be seen. There were a lot of pictures getting taken and everything. When Lars and I got back to the, and plus our seconds, we had these guys that were seconds that went down to the ring with us and took our jackets. When we got back to our dressing room, there was nobody there, not one person. And there was no lock on the door. So I go and I'm looking for a way to jam the door because there's a bunch of people coming right behind us. I'm looking for a way to jam the door. And Lars is trying to see if he can rip there's a big screen for the heat air conditioning duct. It's a big one. It's probably about 3 feet wide and 2 feet high. He's looking to see if he can rip that off the wall. So, because there's no other way out of this place except through that door. So I kept waiting for somebody, to come in. After about 45 minutes, there's a knock on the door, and when I say, "Yeah, who is it?" and it's just the police. So open the door, and it's this Korean police officer. And he looks at us, and he just shook his head. He was so disgusted. And I said, he spoke English, and he said, there's 5,000 people in the parking lot waiting for you guys to come out there. He said, curfew's at midnight, or whatever time it was. We are a half hour away from it. He said, they're all going to have to be home by curfew, so we're going to just wait till then. We just wanted you to know. So, okay, fine. So Lars and I would already waited an hour after our match has been over for an hour. So, by the time it was very quiet in the building. We didn't hear any, we managed to get everybody out of the building. And so I look at, we had watches on. All of a sudden it's midnight, it's 10 after, 15 after. And here comes a cop back. And he said, well, they won't leave. He said, we still got 3,000 people out there. So we're going to have to get some more cars in here to get you guys out of here. So just hang in there. God. So it was 2:30 when we finally got out of there. By the time we got out of there, we went out to the place in the building adjacent to the parking lot, like right outside a door where we could get into a car. They had us in a car in the middle of, there were 2 cars in front of us, 2 cars on each side, and 2 cars behind us. So there were 9 cars, and we were the one in the middle. And we took off, and I thought, by that time, there's nobody in the parking lot. So I thought, I wonder why they're doing this. It sounds like, it's kind of late for this. I can see them doing this when this parking lot had 5,000 people in it. Well, we got about, half a mile from the building, and there's about 1,000 of them down on both sides of the street just waiting. And the cops stopped, called for some backup, and they started arresting people. And it took another half hour or so, but we finally got back to the hotel. So, and Kim didn't have to do that because think about this. There was no return match. Why would he do such a hot finish when you're not coming back? We weren't going to be back ever. Even if it'd be a year from now, if we say, okay, we'll come back, about $200,000 each is what you're going to have to pay me. But we weren't going to come back. So why would he do that? Why would he do that how to finish where you have a riot? And like I say, that was what we found out. I read the international newspaper the next day or a couple of days later, and they hadn't had a break offense like that broke curfew. So they'd had curfew ever since World War II, or the Korean War. I take it back, Korean War in '52. So they'd had curfew in there for like 20 years. And if you broke curfew, you went to jail. And so. But you can't arrest 1,000 people or 2,000 people.
Right.
So, that was unusual. But again, that they'll come. I don't know what he was thinking, except if nothing else, what people could say is, oh, you should have seen us wrestling the other night. And the fact that 1,000 people or 5,000, I don't know how many of them broke curfew, that 1,000 of them at least were out, that means that was something really, really special. That's the best advertising he could get.
Right.
For the next time he wrestles, and in that sense.
So it wasn't so much about you and Lars returning; it was just about the wrestling returning, and maybe just what happened, what transpired would draw.
Yes, it's going to be a wild night. The last time we had it, the wrestlers couldn't even leave the building for 4 hours, and We had, it was perfect for him because what else are they going to talk about for the next month or two was, that night. And
giant jugs of beer and pro wrestling. What could go wrong with that scenario? I was going to say, Bob, when you were telling this story, that you love to travel, man, but you just don't seem to travel well. No matter where you go, Puerto Rico, Iraq, I mean, here in South Korea, I would have stayed in the States if I were you, but then you wouldn't have these stories to tell. So that's pretty cool. I was looking over some of these other names here from Japan specifically, and I was just going to run 2 or 3 of them by you real quick all at once. And if you have anything you want to add about any of these guys, if you remember them or working them here or in the States, because some of these guys did travel a little bit. Adachi became Mr. Hito. He worked quite a bit up in the Stampede promotion specifically. He even had a hand in the old Stu Hart dungeon, training some of the family members, including Bret Hart. There's Katsuwada, who I'm not sure when you went to Australia. He worked over there in 73 and 74 as Hiro Tojo, the great Tojo. And then one of the names that really caught me was a fellow by the name of Taguchi, who becomes Tiger Taguchi, then Kim Duck. I know you wrestled him or worked around him at that point in time. And then eventually Tiger Chung Lee. And he was here on this tour. And he too was a South Korean.
Yeah, I knew Kim Duck. Yeah, I knew him. He was a big guy, good worker. The other 2 guys, I don't, if I saw a picture, I'd probably recognize them, but I don't remember them ever being in a dressing room with them.
Right.
I remember Kim Duck. He was wrestling against Buddy Lindell, Buddy was not a protege, but he was a young guy, kind of helped get in the business and was looking out for him a little bit. And
who was Kim, you were looking out for, Buddy? You're talking about, or?
Yeah, I was looking out for Buddy.
Okay.
And Kim manhandled him a little bit in the ring because he could, and Buddy wasn't tough, and able to protect himself.
Yeah.
And I remember I got in the dressing room. I almost lost it with him. I almost did something you never do to another wrestler, and I'm glad I didn't. But that's why I remember him. Because he pissed me off. He got away. He took advantage of Buddy because he could. He could get away with it. But he didn't like something about Buddy's work. That's fine. Come to the booker about it. You won't be working anymore, but don't humiliate the guy out in the ring. So
now, what territory would this have been?
I think it was Watts.
Yeah, that would make sense. Buddy was kind of breaking in. He was down there still had the dark hair there early on. I think when you were there. Yeah,
Buddy was one of the reasons I went there. We haven't gotten to me being with the Papos yet, but I was talking to him for some reason, and he was out there with Watts.
He did work there too. That makes sense.
Yeah, and he said, Bob, you got to come here, man. He said they can use it. They need another heel. And I did. When I heard that, I called Bill, and he took me. We always say, I believe that as much like everybody else, that if you go opposition, we'd done the opposition before, that you're blackballed, you can't ever get booked again. But that was all crap.
Right.
If you can, a thoroughbred horse throws his jockey one time, he says, he'll never race again. Of course he'll race again if he can make money for you. You get another jockey. You don't get rid of the horse. So, yeah, but again, we were talking about Kim Duck. He was a good enough guy. I mean, it's probably part of his culture. Japanese wrestlers everywhere seem to have more respect and concern for their own reputation. Like we talked about Saito, not wanting to short a match just because there's rocks falling in from the
because people are trying to kill him. There's no reason to shorten the match.
No. Still a rock lands about a foot from his head. Then he thought,
all right,
okay, well, maybe we'll cut off a minute or two here before they cut off my head. But no, I understood the attitude, and I think about it. When you are wrestling in another country, which I did in a lot, more than a few times, you are concerned about what standards you're trying to meet there, to be so you're respected by the other wrestlers. But I said earlier, and I'll say it again, that the pro part of it, the amateur part of it, didn't really relate to the pro as far as performance. As far as having it on my resume, yes, it did. One of the things that I think a lot of people who cared about those kind of things would say, well, anybody who's an Olympian is obviously worth, he might not know a jack diddly squat about how to work, but he's a guy that's done something, or a person who's done something, and I can respect that. I think I mentioned earlier about Nick Bockwinkel being a veteran, and I've reflected a lot on my attitude since you and I started doing this podcast together, Ray. And one of the things I think about my attitude with the background is that by the time I got in, at 26 years old, I was a veteran of 3 years in the service, been 5.5 years in college, 2 different colleges, and graduated from one. I was married and had a child. I had traveled during that time. My amateur wrestling took me to different parts of the United States, as well as Mexico City for the Olympics. So I think that when I got into it, this is not, oh, woo-wee, I'm a big deal. It's just I had a different attitude and a different way of perceiving things than a lot of guys. Because another thing was wrestling under my own name. I was always Bob Roop until I did the Mayhaw Singh thing, and that was good. Because doing that Mayhaw Singh thing at the very end of my career, I got to see what it was like to have this alter ego. Now, transpose that, and where have I been all Mayhaw Singh? Bob Roop was gone. Say I'm wearing a mask, Mayhaw Singh mask, or we're doing a deal that, I've had a lobotomy or something, and I'm Mayhaw Singh for real. I think I am. And, head injury, something. Kevin voodooed me. I've been killed. I came back as Mayhaw Singh. The wrestling shtick, you can do so many things. Voodoo isn't out of the, surprised Sullivan never went there. But I think that being able to, my perceptions, the way of looking at the business was a lot different than someone who got into it and became a character that was created for them. Even if they used their own name, which a lot of guys didn't. If they didn't have any of the substance that went into, all of a sudden you got a guy who really isn't tough. He really can't. He can maybe fight, but he can't beat anybody. He's not physically strong. He's not exceptionally tough. He's not nasty and that deadly. He might be a nice guy. And, so maybe he's a babyface his whole career. But he's not really tough. He's not really able to, go out there and, especially someone like much bigger and stronger and a tough, someone who's a skilled fighter, they're going to be at a serious disadvantage. And what that creates in my mind is a different attitude in the way the person himself is looking at things. I listen to our podcast after we do it. I listen to it when it airs. I think about some of the things I say, and I think, why do you think that way? What created the way you think? Because I think that's part of it. It doesn't make me any better. It doesn't make me any worse, but it makes me different. And I think it's one of the reasons that I want to talk to our listeners out there about this, because seeing it from a little bit different point of view than someone who lived a persona of someone else for their whole career. They became someone else rather than the person they really are. And saw things through that lens. And a lot of times the people I see at FanFest, they're back in character. In fact, sometimes even in private, they're kind of in character. They don't loosen up. Anyway, got off on a tangent. Soapbox again. Get the hook.
Well, that's okay. There's a few more names here I did want to touch on before we close out this episode. And there's some of the bigger names here on the shows. There's another gaijin here, another American worker I did want to discuss. You may not have anything to say about this guy in particular. I don't know that you hung out or did much with him here, but anytime in your career, do you have anything you want to talk about in regards to Rocky Johnson? We've already talked about his father-in-law, Peter Maivia, in the past. Did you spend any time with Rocky here on this tour or in the future when he came to Florida or whatnot?
Yeah, Rocky, I talked to Rocky right away. He was a nice guy. He was refreshing. I remember calling him. We got to Tokyo and we were just checked in a hotel. And I called him. I pretended to be Japanese. I called him Mr. Rocky Johnson, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Your passport's been revoked, sir." And he, what? So anyway, let's put it this way. Looking back on that, wasn't much of a ribber. He still aren't. That I would be able to call him and poke fun at him shows that I thought he was a good guy and would not get mad or anything about it.
Right.
They had a good sense of humor. And we worked a program in Orlando for, I don't know, months. One of our matches of note, that I definitely do remember, I did a deal where I'm on the apron, he's on the inside, right inside the ropes. I got him by the hair, and I run him down. I'm going to run like I'm going to run his head into the turnbuckle.
Right.
And what I had him do was push me off, and I went as if I had tripped. And instead of, between the top and the second rope, I go in between them and hit the turnbuckle myself with my shoulder. Well, when I did it, I ran my shoulder into the hook that hooks in the ropes.
Yeah.
And I looked down. I've got a hole about the size of a 50-cent piece in my shoulder, the front of my shoulder. So it didn't hurt. There's not many nerves up there, but it was pain in the butt because about 2 weeks earlier, Harley was on the same card, and Harley had done a thing where he took a bump over the top and he hit his head on the stairs, the wooden stairs leading up to the ring, and busted his head open. We had to take him and get him stitched up. Instead of we had to go to the local emergency room instead of going back, being able to go right back home.
Right.
So I went, crap, I got to do the same thing. I got to go get it stitched up. But I'm walking around the ring. Now, here's a perfect opportunity. Even when guys get juice, they don't walk around the ring and, unpump in people's face and show it to them. But here's something that's not, this is a real injury. So what I was doing, I was walking around the ring with that shoulder as close to the fans as, like I was a couple feet away, and I'm holding it and I'm making it very obvious. They could see it. It's bleeding, of course. Not bad. It wasn't spurting blood. I didn't bust an artery or anything. But, you could see it. There's a big hole in my arm and my shoulder, the front of my shoulder. So nobody passed out, nobody puked or anything, but they could see it. I could see their eyes widen when they saw it. So I did a lap or two around the ring and I let them see it, and I'm telling the referees counting, and I'd go back and break the count and whatever. Finally, I get back in the ring. Well, Rocky hadn't seen it yet, so he grabs. It was my left shoulder, so he grabs my left arm, and I fed it to him because the shoulder that got hurt, obviously. So he spins under my arm a couple of times to let crank on it, and he's whacking my shoulder. Well, when he's whacking my shoulder, I bend forward to where he's whacking the back of my shoulder because I don't want him to get any sweat or any bacteria or whatever into that open wound. So he hadn't seen it yet, but there's blood running down my arm. So he's cranked under a couple of times, and he's got both his hands on my wrist, and that blood is running down my arm, and it runs onto his hands. And he looks down, and he sees it on his hands, and he looks at his own hands like, well, I'm not bleeding. And he follows the blood trail up my arm. He sees that hole on my shoulder, and oh my God, I didn't know that Rocky gets very uneasy with blood, and he turned. His jaw dropped. I thought he was going to pass out. I had to grab him. He tried to let go of me. I had to grab his.
No, Rock, we're working a match.
No, man, don't let go of me. Jesus, you should be happy I'm hurt. So yeah, I'll never forget that reaction. It's like, but we went ahead and finished the match, and I think it wasn't long. I'm not sure. No, I was gone by that time. Rocky left in a hurry after the episode with the Briscoes and Ernie Ladd. But we don't talk about that tonight. That's somewhere down the road.
That's fine. We'll save that for sure.
But Rocky was a good guy to work with. Good, he got over. People believed that, he looked good. He kept his body in good shape. He was smart. He did good interviews. He was a good worker. He could convince people that he had a lot of fire when he made comebacks and stuff. They'd get with it.
Absolutely.
So I enjoyed working with him. We wouldn't have worked a long program if it didn't draw. So obviously we were doing well enough at the box office that we kept coming back. And Orlando was a good town to work too because it was fairly close to Tampa, as opposed to having to go to West Palm Beach. Yeah, Rocky was good. I saw him at one of Scott Teal's get-togethers over there in Tennessee a few years ago. before he passed away. And, you know, it was good to see him. He was good. He was kind of reveling in being, you know, the Rock's dad. And, you know, you think about it, he's got a long line with Peter Maivia and,
Sure.
and you know, Peter's wife and the Rock. You know, there's 3 generations of, you know, really, really successful wrestlers in that family.
The Rock has a good bloodline for wrestling and just showmanship for sure.
Well, he took it and put it all together and made it something that, you know, he saw far beyond what
He
most
sure
wrestlers
did.
did. Yeah.
He sure did. Now, eventually, you'll go on to work for both New Japan and All Japan, Bob. So you'll have the ability to work both Baba and Inoki again down the line. So we're going to lump that all together. Now, we're going to visit those tours that I'm talking about in due time. But right now, I was hoping maybe you could discuss just a little bit about your memories of working with Giant Baba as well as Antonio Inoki. I'll let you pick which one you want to start with. But I was just curious, their different styles, maybe their different personalities, if you got to know them a little bit. I just wanted to get your take, just in a nutshell, of your time here, specifically this tour, any tour, working with the Giant Baba and then Antonio Inoki.
They were both fine to work with, although, and this only happened one time, but Baba in 5 seconds gave me 2 extremely egregious potatoes. One was, I was coming off the ropes, he hit me with an elbow that hit me right between the eyes. And then as I bounced off the second time, he chopped me in the throat and hit me right in the Adam's apple.
So those Baba chops, those things could be legit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it didn't kill me, but both of them were, you know, hurt. They were potatoes.
Right.
You don't want to hit a guy in the face with your elbow. But you know, he's 6'8", whatever, and long arms, and so you know, I wasn't going to complain about it. I liked the guy. I like working with him. You know, one of the things, I don't know if it happened this way, but Baba the company ended up being owned by a TV station, and so did Inoki's. So they both had a TV station. You know, they said Baba used to light cigars with $100 bills in front of people. I'm not surprised because the TV was making a fortune. So I don't know what kind of deal they had with them, but they had that going for them. And now Inoki, every match I had with Inoki was fine. One match is still talked about over there. Malenko and I, Larry Simon, Professor Boris Malenko, we went over there right before we went opposition in Knoxville. So it would have been 78, 79, somewhere in there. Larry Simon, great Malenko. Larry and I were working out together in Knoxville. We were both heels. And we would jog and run, we'd do deck of cards and do squats and push-ups and squat thrusts. I don't remember even how we got booked, but we went there with him as my manager. What we used to do is we'd run all the time. We'd be out jogging. And a lot of times we would get to a city, we would fly there or take the train, and we'd be in the city, and Larry and I would go out, we'd put on our running clothes and go out and it was summer there, I think. It was warm anyway. We'd go out and we'd run the streets of the city. And a few times the Japanese boys would be coming in on the bus that they took to get to the city, and they see us. So they noticed that we were working out. And the only reason I make note of that is that they respected that. If you were working hard at being in shape and all that, because they all worked out. I mean, Carl Gosch made a whole career out of going over there and being a trainer and making the guys do 600 squats and 600 push-ups and all that. He did that for years and he got paid very well for doing that. And they respect that kind of thing. So, what I'm leading up to, at the end of this tour, a couple of days before the tour's due to end, we're going on TV, me against Inoki. Now, Inoki had already had the fight with Muhammad Ali. So, I mean, this guy's, he's world famous.
Right.
So, especially famous in Japan. He went on to become a senator and all that over there. So anyway, we do a match on TV, 45 minutes on television, and there was very little. I don't remember ever punching him. Maybe a forearm or two. But we did a lot of wrestling, and they didn't want to beat me, so we did some kind of thing, a DQ of some kind. But we went 45 minutes. Now I didn't think anything special at the time. I was in good enough shape that it was easy to do. But we had a referee that, think about it, the referee over there, if it's the same guy for every tour, he's been seeing matches every night or average of 6 nights a week for what, maybe years.
Sure.
And so yeah, he's seen everything, every kind of match. He never said anything about our matches. Let's go back years to when Lars and I did that thing with all the blood and everything. The referee didn't come afterwards and say, hey, good match. We didn't get any of that, So after the 45 minutes with Inoki, the referee said, good match. It would be like if you hand me a bottle of champagne and the girls walked in with the flowers and the music started playing, just for him to say good match. Because that guy never said anything, no matter what you did. So, and years later, I've had, even 20 years later, I've had people, or Japanese people that I run into, when they hear my name, they say, oh, you and Inoki, yes, I remember. So,
Very cool.
Oh, it is, it's nice to be remembered. So, yeah, that was, I'll never forget that one. I've got the match somewhere. Yeah, and he was easy to work with, he had some amateurish type techniques that he could apply if he wanted to.
For sure.
And so if you could tell us, I've talked in past programs about wanting to tell a story. And if I could, it was the old deal, you try to out wrestle a guy and somehow he just happens to keep coming out on top. And finally you get fed up with it and, you take advantage, break the rules to get an advantage. And then you build your heat that way. And to me, that's typical, like real life. A guy doesn't get a new job and go in and start beating up his competitors in the office to, the first day to advance himself in his work. Why would you in your wrestling in a match? Baba, I don't remember anything. Well, I do remember something special. One of my injuries that I got, and I never get hurt over there. Except one time I got a black eye. And it was on a tour, a later tour. George Steele and I were partners against Baba and somebody on TV. And we had a wild kind of a melee at the finish. The TV, it wasn't at a TV station. It was at a building, an arena. And the ring was set up, and there were in the center of the floor, and they had put chairs out, and there were like aisles. Like if you had a clock, there was an aisle at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. There were aisles leading out of there. Well, George and I got separated on the floor. And by the time I looked for him, he had started down an aisle. There was about 25 people between me and getting to his aisle. I was right at the beginning of another aisle. So I went down that aisle. I figured once we get out from among the people out here, I'll just go down the hallway and meet him where he's coming out of that aisle. It's only about 25, 30 feet or 40 feet. So I get down to the end of my aisle and go around the corner. What's happened is that between the end of his aisle, his row, and my row, there's about 25 people out there. Now, that wasn't a big problem. They weren't doing anything. They weren't trying to kill anybody. They just were out there waiting to see us come out. So I'm behind them. Well, I'm approaching from the back, and in front of me is a little lady about 70 years old, maybe 95 pounds. I'm about 3 or 4 feet behind her, and I'm just getting ready to move around her. And George Steele, George the Animal, comes out of that his aisle, and he turns towards the group of people that I'm approaching from the back, and he rears up like a dinosaur and screams and growls out, "Ah!" Well, they all turned and headed for home, and it was so quick. A bunch of people, that little old lady, she got run over, but she didn't go down. She got blasted off her feet, and the back of her head hit me right under my left eye.
Oh.
And, yeah, bang! And I grabbed her so she didn't fall down.
Right.
I managed not to get run over by the rest of the group.
I was going to ask you, did the black eye come from being trampled?
No. I got headbutted by a little old lady who didn't have any say-so at all in the matter.
Man, I'm telling you, Bob, people are probably going right now, wait, you teamed with George Steele? I mean, is there anybody you didn't come in contact with throughout your career? I mean, just such odd things, It's the Olympian and George the Animal Steele teaming up on a tour of All Japan back in the mid-'70s. And you were talking about that other tour you did with New Japan. I think that one was 79. I saw some matches from that video in the past, and I was like, Johnny Powers was on that tour and things. So you like crossed paths with pretty much everybody who ever did anything anywhere. It's just cool, all the names and whatnot that you've met throughout the years or maybe wrestled against and this, that, and the other. It's kind of interesting, the differences between Inoki and Baba in the ring, out of the ring. Of course, they go on to run their own promotions. They're both very successful for a very long time. As a wrestling fan, I will say to anybody out there who's only seen Baba wrestle in the 80s and the 90s, do yourselves a favor, go on YouTube or whatever you got to do, go back in time and watch early Baba. He was amazing for a guy his size, much like Andre, before it caught up to him, the giantism. He could move around. He did some things. He was pretty fun to watch, honestly, back in this time period. And Inoki was always the ground grappler, good wrestler, if you're into that type of wrestling as well. So I'm sure you had some really solid matches with both guys here in not just 1970, but obviously on your tours again. And I noticed here as I scrolled through the results, Bob, as we get close to the end of the show, it looked like they protected you. Not so much in the tag team matches. I don't know who was doing the jobs. Obviously, you guys weren't there to win the tag league. I think it was Baba's team that eventually does, go figure. But they seem to protect you in the singles matches because anybody you work on the card, you seem to be going over outside of the big names, the guys that were super established by this point. Oki, the Great Kojika, and then, of course, Baba and Inoki. I think those are the only four guys that beat you on this. Well, it's 40-day tour over, I think, 30 nights actually in the ring.
Right. Yeah, I saw that too, and I was surprised. Like I say, if the matches went okay, I don't remember them. But, yeah, it looked like they were. Because, I mean, I was low man on the totem pole as far as time in the business and experience.
Right.
Now, again, I had that credibility of the Olympian thing, which means something in Japan. Now, they're lightweights. They have a lot of gold medals wrestling, and they're lighter weights. But for the heavier weights, they very few. So anybody that does anything in over 165, 70 pounds will be famous all over Japan forever.
Do you think that was done just to make it even bigger for guys like Baba or Inoki when they go over on you? They beat the American Olympian who was beating some of the local talent heading into those matches later on in the tour?
Well, I don't think it was that as much as Duke could tell him or Hero or whatever could tell him that I wasn't ready to be up there in the main event. They didn't want to have anybody in there. They had to hand lead and hand feed. And there were some areas that I wasn't ready yet, to be able to adjust in the ring to. Because I hadn't had the experience. You got time for a Duke Keomuka story?
Sure, why not? I mean, it's a full circle. We started with Duke. I forgot he even went with you over there at this point. We've gotten so far into the Japanese tour, but sure, why not?
Duke and I went over there together, like I said. And now, I don't think, in fact, I'm pretty sure we didn't go on the same plane because I don't remember him being with me in Los Angeles. I think Duke might have even been there when I got there. I don't remember. That's not the point. But I was in the hotel, and by the first, second morning, there's a knock on my door in the morning. And it's Duke. And he had told me the night before somewhere, or how, I don't know, phone call or in person, that he would meet me at the hotel in the morning. At my hotel, he stayed at a different hotel. He stayed at a Japanese hotel. So he knocks on my door, and I'm surprised. I figured he'd meet me in the lobby. I'm up on the fifth or sixth floor, whatever. So, I opened up, come in. He said, do you mind if I use your bathroom before we go? I said, of course not. So he goes in the bathroom, and, I'm not standing outside the door waiting, but I went and did something. He's been there long enough that I know he's not just taking a whiz, let's put it that way.
Uh-huh.
So next morning, same thing. Third morning, same thing. And on the third morning, he says, let me buy you breakfast today. We go down, and he orders a big bowl. But what they order, they bring out a big tureen of, I think it's not chicken broth, like fish broth. And they bring out on a tray, every kind of fish, clams, mussels, snails, octopus, squid, fish, eels, lobster, crayfish, every kind of seafood you can think of.
Wow.
And what you do is they get a fire going under the big tureen, and you get that fish broth hot, and you put the fish in there, all the seafood you put in there, or you can eat it raw. If you like it raw, you eat it raw. If you don't, you can put it in there. Well, I put anything I wanted to eat, I wanted cooked. So I would, I like sushi now, but I'd never had any at that time. You're just not used to eating raw fish. I was putting stuff in there and cooking it up, getting it cooked a little bit before I ate it. Well, anyway, this had to be, I don't know, multi-dollar breakfast. But Duke came every morning again for another couple of weeks, as long as we were there in Tokyo. And because he was in a Japanese hotel where the bathroom was down on the floor. And in order to use it, you have to be able to squat down and basically, squat all the way down and rest on your haunches. Like it's a lot easier for women to do apparently than for men. And Duke was too old, plus our knees are gone by the time. So he needed my bathroom. Although when I think about it, they probably had a bathroom downstairs, but maybe he would have lost space if he used the public bathroom. Anyway, that's not the point, but let's fast forward to a TV. Nick Bockwinkel's in the ring against somebody. It doesn't matter who. And Duke is doing a color commentary. I've already worked. I've left, and I'm going back to my hotel. What's happening is Nick is supposed to get blood. He's supposed to bleed, and he's got a blade on his finger. What they told him was that when it comes time, throw the wrestler out of the ring, turn your back, and when he gets ready, when he goes to come back in, he'll do something, he'll punch you, he'll hit you, and then you use it. So Nick threw the guy out, and he turned his back because the TV camera that he thought was on him would be just seeing his back. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to be and you're alone in there. But what they didn't know, or he didn't know, was they had a roving camera. And so what Nick was doing was he was having trouble he had a Band-Aid covering, he had the adhesive taping the blade in there, but he had a Band-Aid over top of that, flesh-colored Band-Aid, so it wasn't obvious. And he couldn't get the Band-Aid off. So he's picking at it. Now this guy with the mobile camera comes and he puts his camera on Nick's finger. Now I'm walking into my hotel and there's above the reception counter, there's a big TV. And I look up this TV and all I see is this picture of Nick, and then they're getting closer and closer and all I see is his finger. And his finger is about the size of, say, a basketball on the screen. That's all you see. It's just the end of his finger.
Zoomed in.
Yes, zoomed in. He's trying to peel the tape off it. And you can see there's something underneath it. Well, at the same time, the Japanese commentator's seeing this too. And in Japanese, his pitch and his delivery and his speed and civil, everything, his voice has risen to a hysterical, like, what's he doing? What's he doing? What is that? What's going on? And Duke is the color commentator sitting over there next to him, and Duke knows what's going on, but Duke doesn't know what to tell him. So I don't know what Japanese, what abba sounds like in Japanese, but that's what Duke was doing. Abba. And anyway, I thought, my God, you talk about an expose, but they got the word to Nick, and he never used it. So, it just became a curiosity, but I'll never forget walking in that lobby and looking up and seeing a finger. A finger is, you'll fill the whole screen.
Hey.
End of a finger.
Hey.
Yeah.
And hey, also, Nick, ixnay the Azer Ray there, Nick.
Yeah. And then Duke was like, so, yeah, that, I never did Duke about that because I think it was kind of a sore subject. But,
that had to catch him off guard. Oh, what are they doing? What is going on? Oh no!
Oh yeah.
Oh.
He had to get ready. They had to get word to the referee to tell him ixnay, yeah, because if he'd have used it, they thought, of course, he was going to use it on the other guy, not on himself.
Well, Gary Hart tells this story in Dallas, when the big time, they went big time there in the early 80s, and they came in with all the boom mics and everything up against the ring and the extra cameras around ringside. He finally had to take the head of production aside and explain to him that wrestling was a work and that this is how we do all of this, that, and the other, so that they wouldn't expose the business, but at least it was just the head producer who was in the know. So he kind of directed everybody else on what not to do, but they didn't know why not to do it. So, but Gary Hart said it was impossible after the first couple outings that this guy, we had to let him know what was going on.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you couldn't really do that back then with the camera guys. And even, I guess, even this announcer that was with Duke really didn't know what was going on because he was, what is that? What's happening here? So, it's very interesting that even the announcer there wasn't even in the know as to how the business operated.
I mean, think about it. The wrestlers were exposed. I mean, it would be humiliating. They'd have to leave the country probably. I mean, it'd be humiliating to find out that they were just working, totally against, the sumo wrestling. I'm not, for all I know, don't get me wrong, I'm not insulting anybody. The sumo might be rigged or, they might, you don't have to, only the guy that's losing needs to know it's a work. The winner doesn't have to know. All you have to do is tell the loser, we need you to lose. The winner doesn't have to know. So, you only have to pay one guy if that's what you're doing to get him to lose. But in this case, of course, the Japan, I mean, my hats off to them. They were great people to work for.
Well, that's great to hear. And I'm sure we're going to touch on it more. You've got other tours and a lot more names like George the Animal Steele. I can't wait to get into in the future episodes here, Bob. But man, what a fun couple hours, kind of flew by, just learning a little bit about Japanese culture back then and how it worked with the wrestlers when they came into town and how you guys ate, where you guys slept, and going on all these different trains and planes and automobiles, if you will. And it sounded like a hell of a time. I'm sure you were happy to experience the Japan for the first time here. It won't be your last time. And again, we'll get into that in the future episodes, but very fun. You got to spend a lot of time with Nick Bockwinkel, which is cool. One of my favorites of all time. So that's cool to hear. And you guys do seem like two peas in a pod. If I were going to classify two people, both of you very similar, at least in the way you guys, you both sound very educated when you explain things. So I kind of liken you guys in the same facet. So I can see you guys enjoying some of the same stuff. But again, I really wish there was film out there of you guys doing karaoke. But that's a different story. Different story for another day.
Right.
But I appreciate it, Bob, man. I appreciate I was kind of wondering going in. I knew we had enough to cover here that where we were going to cover an entire show on this tour, but I didn't realize how much we were going to be able to cover here. So many different stories and things from you wrestling down in South Korea, which I didn't even know about. So that was an extra little bonus piece there for everybody, including myself. But just a fun time from beginning to end. I appreciate this one.
Well, thank you, Ray. I appreciate the chance to be able to share this with you and with our listeners out there. Thank you again for listening. Happy New Year. Best to you for now and always, my friends.
And I'll say this too, Bob, before we go. It's amazing how much you recall from this period here in your very first Japan tour. So because you talked about in 77 or 78 or whatever, 77, you said, I don't even remember wrestling Pat Patterson, but that means it probably went well. But you seem to recall a lot of things that happened outside of the ring, and that's what everybody's waiting for anyway. The great stories, the good times, and your interactions with all these other very familiar, famous names, much like yourself, throughout the history of professional wrestling. And that's what brought us all here, man. That's why I'm here, and that's why the listeners are here. So we're looking forward to more. Next time around, guys, we will be back. We'll head back to the Florida territory from here. We'll have to wait and see. Me and Bob will discuss where we go next. In the meantime, stay tuned to our social media, and you'll find out soon where we go next here on the Wrestling Stoop Show. But Bob, thank you once again.
Well, thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. Stay well, my friend, and we'll be back soon.
All right, guys, that's going to do it here this week. We're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Bob one more time for taking the time out to share his stories and entertain us all. I invite you guys to go friend Bob over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And of course, you guys can follow me, Ray Russell, on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. It's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And hey, guys, give it a try talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. You won't be disappointed with all the gifts you get there for just $5. But until next time, can't wait to see where we're headed next. We appreciate you guys listening, as this has been another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.